Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Kolbjørnsen. I'm the president here at the BI Norwegian Business School. And of course, it's a very great pleasure for me today to welcome you all to this panel debate with the title EU at the Turning Point. Which is better for business, a closer federation of states or a looser collection of nations? And we are about to listen to a debate about EU from a business perspective. And I'm looking very much forward to finding out how the panel views the issues concerning a deeper European integration. How has the development within EU affected the Norwegian industry and business owners? We are very pleased to have with us CNN's own Richard Quest as the moderator, who will present and talk about the subject in a little while. Richard Quest is CNN's foremost international business correspondent and presenter of Quest Means Business, the definitive word on how we earn and spend our money. He is one of the most instantly recognizable members of the CNN team, and we are very glad to see you here, Richard.
Thank you, sir.
For the panel, we are also very fortunate to have very excellent debate people here. And first here we have Ulf Sverdrup, who is director of NUPI, the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. Then we have Anne Siri Koksrud. She's both a Master of Science student here at BI and Secretary Commissioner of Culture and Business Development in Oslo. And then we have Arne Jon Isaksen, who is a professor of economics here at BI. And last but not least, Kjell Morten Johnsen, Executive Vice President and Head of Telenor's operations in Europe. So, it's a great pleasure to present to you our moderator for this debate, Richard Quest, please.
Good morning. It's never particularly pleasant to have to wash your dirty linen in public. Especially when you're not even a member of the club. But that gives you and our panel here today something of a license. A license to be honest, a license to be brutal, and a license to tell us what needs to happen next. But before we begin, any of you who think that this is a one-way street where they talk and you listen is wrong. Because you're expected to take part too. That's the nature of debate. So you see that little thing you've got in front of you, the yes and the no. It's a good way of starting. Let's start off first of all. Who believes the European Union is a good idea? Show it so that we see the colour. Who believes that the European Union is a good idea? Overwhelming numbers of yeses. Okay? No, whoa, whoa, whoa. You may be students, but you can wait a little bit longer. Now, in that mode, who wishes to stay with that colour facing us? Who believes that the European Union is working well? I think that clearly sums it up quite nicely, doesn't it?
Very nicely. You know.
Thank you. Go on.
You know, Gandhi also said that civilization is a great idea. Western civilization is a good idea. I think the audience point to a very clear problem.
What is that problem?
The EU is a fairly good idea, but it has some deep flaws in its design, and it doesn't connect to its citizens.
Fairly basic. So, Kjell, how do you think?
I think the fundamental issue which is reflected here is that when you can't get people work, people get extremely unsatisfied, and obviously if this school had been located in Spain or in Hungary or maybe in Italy, 30% or 40% would have faced unemployment after school. And a system that can't generate jobs for young people has come far in the direction of being a failed system. And there are obvious reasons why these things are happening. We can get back to that because you're going to cut me off.
Right, we will, because I don't want you to I don't want you to exhaust yourself too soon. Is it broken? Is it broken? Sorry, Anne, to you. Is it broken?
Well, I wouldn't say it's broken, but there were some flaws from the beginning that perhaps.
Well, is it broken?
Well, of course, if you have a union or if you have a system that is wasting.
Look, if this isn't broken, I'd hate to see it broken.
Okay, yeah. If you are wasting the talents of an entire generation, I guess you could say it's broken. Yes.
Good. So we've got 3-1 that says it's broken. So far, they're with the panel. They're with the room. Professor, is it broken?
By way of introduction, I don't have to have a license, to be honest.
You have carte blanche.
As you gave us the license, to be honest, I don't need that. But is it broken? It's about to get broken.
I might have guessed if I'd asked the professor a straight question, I'd end up with trouble. What do you mean it's about to get broken?
Because the euro is one step too far.
But now you're talking about the cause. I mean, it's about to get broken because system relies on trust, and trust is binary. Either you trust or you don't trust. And if 3/4 of the people here do not trust the system, and you get the same kind of tendency out there, then you are going down a slippery slope. And that is why I'm not saying it's broken, but it's a high risk of going down a very slippery path.
I want to just take this bit by bit because otherwise we could end up in a huge morass. I think so there is a consensus both in the room and with the panel. Yes, if you talk right into your microphones, there's a consensus that both in the room and on the panel that something needs to be done. Whatever we've got at the moment is not the right thing, correct? We all agree with that. We all agree?
Mm-hmm, yes.
We all agree. Good. So, the core question, do the countries need to get closer or do they need to start drifting apart and unraveling?
I think there's a combination. You need a combination. So some countries need to get closer, and others might should perhaps drift a bit further apart.
Name names. Name and shame.
I think the periphery of Europe, in the southern periphery, they struggle with being in the Eurozone. Maybe they should leave the Eurozone. Whereas some countries to the west of us, UK, might find it difficult to be in this situation. So I'm not saying that I wouldn't recommend this solution, but I see this coming, that you have a two-tier system in the EU, where you have a fairly integrated Eurozone.
Yeah, you don't have a two-tier system in the union. You used to have a union, or you started out with a union. Then someone invented two-speed Europe, and now you have a 10-speed Europe. You have all these different and overlapping agreements, and that's part of the problem.
Right, so what's part of the solution? Coming back to you, Gail, what's part of the solution? Is it better to have a closer integration, and we'll talk about what that might mean in a minute, or a closer integration or a looser collection?
I think that we, as companies, we don't have opinions about that. That's purely a political question. But if you look at it from a practical point of view, then obviously when we compare business in Europe with what we see in Asia and in the US, then of course we're coming at a disadvantage because we have too many regulatory issues to deal with. We have a system that is supposed to be one EU, but in reality you are dealing with one EU and 27 governments. And that is a bit too complex for us.
So if I extrapolate your view, we are better off moving to a closer collection, to a closer integration. I mean, you may say, please do find a seat. You'll find a seat somewhere in the middle. I do hate to see students standing. They fall over after a while. If I extrapolate your views, even though you're not political, based on the idea that you're finding it difficult to mechanize at the moment, you must want to move towards a closer integration.
At least you need to have those fundamentals in place that give you a completely unified zone that you can work in, and not a through thing. Whether that is a federal union or it's a developed...
What's your personal view?
My personal view is that it's going to be pretty difficult to move on without a stronger center on this. And then it's up to each and every one whether the person likes that kind of vision. But if you want an organization, whether it's political or it's in business, needs to be in movement. And if you should be in movement, you need to be able to lead from some kind of center. If you don't do that, it's going to be very hard to bring people on board and bring them forward. And you have to have a story to people. If that story doesn't exist, you won't get anywhere.
I think the basic issue is one of solidarity, because you have 27 countries and 17 of those have emerged upon a common currency. And what they really wanted was a fiscal union, but you cannot have that. So you have a monetary union, which presupposes a fiscal union. So you start with B to arrive at A, and that equation doesn't work.
Right, we know, but that's where we are at the moment. So now look to the future. What's your preference for the way forward?
Either you get the solidarity forthcoming one way or another, or you disintegrate to some extent.
Daniel, there's not much solidarity among people with 30% unemployment.
But then that gives a solution. Then you have to sort of find a way in which to dismantle the euro and still have the European Union with internal market and all these things up and running.
You're just giving me the options. You're not telling me which is the preferred solution.
That's not for me to decide.
Well, I could tell you the options. You either get closer or you go further apart. Tell me the pros and cons of both.
Do you have 2 hours or what is...
You've got about 30 seconds.
The pros is that if you get an ever-close union, then you get some kind of United States of Europe, which is an entity will carry much weight in the global society, much to the good for the global society, perhaps. If you go for the disintegration within limits, then you get back for the Italians to decide for themselves and the Germans to decide for themselves, and they can have different preferences, and now that is not the case.
Ulf.
Yeah, I think Arne Jon pointed to some of the mechanisms. I think that we live in a world of huge economic and political power shifts. And in this world, I think in order for Europe to have its say, I think Europe should be more integrated. And I think that's also good for the world if Europe would be more integrated.
Define integration.
But yeah, that's the point. I think that we...
Well, please do it!
Yeah. I think we should...
I know we're in consensus Norway.
No.
But I'd like to actually try and get an answer where one of you come off the fence.
Yeah, but I think this is one of the points. I think most of the students here as well, or people in the audience, they would very much support European cooperation. Very few are against European cooperation. And the issues of European integration, what do we mean by integration? And what kind of the extent of commitment is related to that? Everybody agrees that, okay, we have dependencies in the market, so we're integrated in that sense. We have contacts, we cross marriages, etc. We have shared rules and regulations. Do we have shared visions, ideas, etc.? And I think this is the kind of degree of integration. That's the issue.
Which might be described as the slippery slope, Arnie.
Yes, it might be described as a slippery slope, but it's, I think it's much to some extent a technical issue. How do you dismantle the euro? Can that be done in a decent manner, or is that too much of an uphill fight?
How did we get to dismantling the euro? We're not there yet.
Yeah, well, I'm there. Because that's the core issue. All the other things is a piece of cake. All the other things is easy to deal with. And these gentlemen know this, and 27 countries and different rules. Okay, that's too bad, but that's not the big issue. The big issue is the euro, because the euro is making the union not functioning anymore, and it presupposes a solidarity which isn't there.
I tend to agree with you on the sequencing here. I mean, if you don't have the rules around the Maastricht and 60%, and they have not been observed and followed at all, and people have been cheating. So you can say that the platform for the euro was only put partly in place, and it was never really followed up in a good way. So without that, it's very hard for the euro to become a success story, that's for sure.
It's not very hard to become it's a disaster. It's not about it's a success, it's a
speaking,
disaster.
I'm speaking
So
like a
this is-
typical Norwegian, you know, a little bit subdued and...
Yes, but Mr. Richard has to do his job, and that's make me come up front. So this is alluding to or doing what you asked me to do, and then so it is a disaster, and the issue is that you
Is the euro hold beneath the waterline? Is it
total disaster. It's a total. I mean, you talk about 30% unemployment, and those unemployed in Greece and in Spain and Italy, they blame the Germans.
with good cause?
No, not at all, because of the euro. Because
No, come on.
if you take away the euro, then responsibility rests with the individual country.
With good cause, a common monetary policy that was designed for the strongest economy.
Yeah, but that's why exactly you shouldn't have had it in the first place.
But they've got it.
Exactly, and that's the error. So how do you dismantle it?
But I want to come back to the point. We'll start here now. We'll stay with the euro because what Ulf is talking about is really something more than just the euro, aren't you? You're talking about a union that's based on ideals and goals. And you, Professor, are talking, you're talking about a union based on the euro. Now, if he's right about union and goals, and if you take the UK, for example, the UK's opposition, surely, to the EU is not just based on a euro. It's based on the Working Time Directive. It's based on olive oil regulations. It's based on an entire raft of new rules. That's got nothing to do with the euro.
No, that's true. And that is a problem for the Great Britain. But most European continental countries, they are not on the side of the British. So the British is a special case. And they might decide in 2017 to leave the whole business, if they so like. But that's not the main issue here.
What do you think the main issue is, Gil?
I said it 3 times already. Could you repeat?
No, not you. Not you. Reverse me. What do you think the main issues are?
I think the underlying thing here is you talk about support for the original idea in the beginning here, and almost everyone said yes. The original idea of the coal and steel union and the peace in Europe and all these things that were coming out of the World War II, I think most people subscribe to that view. What is very worrying here is that people, due to an introduction of a currency and because of some cucumbers and olive oils and these things, we start focusing on the wrong things. So people start losing the trust in the whole system. So what is at stake is that the starting point, which so many people subscribe to, is being forgotten. People start to focus on completely different things. Whether they have a job, or whether they think people are stupid because they talk about how cucumbers should look. And these are the wrong things to focus on.
Cucumbers are jobs.
Jobs are good to focus on.
No, I think that I would say the problem is not the cucumber thing. Euro is certainly.
How did we get on to cucumbers?
I did.
He did. The euro is certainly a problem, and I think that there's a risk that we reflect on Europe's problem as only a euro problem. I think underlying the whole thing is we have there's some fundamental problems related to welfare states and the way we govern our societies in this part of the world. And the issue is about the sustainability of those welfare states. This is underlying some of the problems. And of course, the euro crisis makes this tackling of these problems a bit more difficult. And I guess that's the point of our.
But what you're basically saying is the euro is not the be-all and end-all of the issue, whereas you think it is much more the be-all and end-all of the issue.
What do you say?
The euro is the core of the whole problem.
Yes, because that makes for growth not forthcoming, and it makes for countries blaming one another. And you said quite wrongly that Germany benefits from the euro. That's not the case. Germany wouldn't like to use taxpayers' money to bail out the Greek. So it's.
But it's doing it.
Yes, but do they like it?
But they do get some more export from a lower.
Yeah, of course they do, but
currency.
the point is not to get maximum export. The point is to get maximum welfare. And
Which comes to the point, surely, that the whole euro, I didn't want to turn it into a euro debate, but it's going that way. The whole thing is really a political project, not an economic one. Do we agree?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And you're not nodding or shaking your
Yeah, I
head.
agree. Yeah.
Good. In which case, if it is a political project, not an economic one, then they will do whatever it takes to make sure it survives.
I'm not sure if they will, because there are two problems. One is that there's unclear notions about what is the correct direction, and there's fundamental uncertainty about whether they have the capacity and the energy to make those right decisions. So I think it's a very uncertain future, and there I think that I would like to make a point towards what you said in the introduction, that this is. We are in Telenor, you say, okay, we are a business operating in the European market and we are not dealing with politics. I think in the history of European integration, businesses played an important role in promoting European integration and building markets, and I don't think that you can separate easily politics and markets. So I think businesses have a responsibility to advocate some kind of positions of what kind of Europe they would prefer to have.
And certainly the executive vice president and head of Telenor's European operations
No, we do that all the time, but it's a question of how you do it. It's not always the ideal thing to sit and have strong opinions about individual things, but we work often through organizations. I myself, when I lived abroad, I was the president of the Foreign Investors Council of Serbia, and I was having half the government in telling them what we think they should do. We gave them a book with all of our recommendations. So business works with governments. But we think that it's better when businesses work through organizations in a transparent way rather than to run around having views here and there.
Okay, but if you had to have a view on a collection versus integration, from a purely commercial point of view, is Telenor better off with a European Union that is closer together, better integrated? I'll give you three choices here. I'll give you a get-out-of-jail-free card. You can have better with closer integration, better with loose collection, or it won't make any difference, we'll still rob you blind with roaming charges regardless.
That's back to our discussion in the, on the way down. Well, since I am Norwegian, I don't really accept to be put on the spot with these three ones, so I define my own. The reality is, the company, for those 6-7 countries that I'm responsible for, none of them are Euro countries, and you would arrest me and say that Denmark de facto is, and I would buy that argument. So it doesn't really matter for us, the Euro as such, but what matters for us is, of course, whether those countries that are inside are getting their growth rate up, and whether those who are aspiring to become members, A, continue on that path, and B, get a FDI coming out of the EU and get higher exports in. So we are indirectly affected by this.
Anne, we haven't heard from you for a moment or two. You're listening to what the discussion is going on, and we're well and truly in the depths and weeds of the euro now, which of course is somewhat of a disaster. You'd agree?
Yes, I mean, the basic question again is why is Europe wasting a generation of talent? But of course the euro is so closely integrated to that question, so it's hard to separate them. I would like to something when it comes to asking Telenor about whether they are better off with a closer integration or a looser coalition or a looser cooperation between states. Should we be asking Telenor, or should we be asking the companies that are up and coming, the small companies in the individual countries? I mean, because Telenor,
asking them what?
Whether they are better off with a closer integration or with a looser or less.
They're going to say better off with the closer integration.
Yes.
Most companies will say that they are better off with a looser, with a closer integration.
So that then you answer your own question. If a closer integration is better for business, then smaller companies across Europe would say yes. And if that is so, then I think if the question was what is better for business, then I would also agree that closer integration is better for business, because you can't just ask the global players whether they prefer to have an easy way in.
I buy that argument, because if you look at it, also in our industry, we would love to have the industry looking more like what the American players have had now. 10 years ago, the European industry was far ahead of the Americans. Now the Americans are ahead of us. They have a much more benign regulatory system. They have come to the forefront of this industry. And we see it happening. And we see that things are happening quite slowly here in Europe. And that is... Did we open the closet here?
We did. You did. Did I hear the phrase benign regulatory system used?
Yeah. Well, it's very simple. But if you look at it, if you have 300 million customers plus, and you have one spectrum allocation for that you can do one off and have predictability on that, that's fine. If you have to do it in 27 places, it is a bit more complicated. And often the difference here is that some people are willing to take a position that is long-term in terms of I'm becoming very detailed about our industry, but spectrum is very important, whereas others would like to keep it up in the air every 10 years or so, and that does not promote investment.
So here's the question. Let's stay with you for a minute then. Let's focus on this for a second or two, because here we have the conundrum, don't we? Here we have the difficulty. On the one hand, if you have a single market, like the United States, with a benign regulatory authority, you might get the growth, or you might get the benefits you seek.
Yeah.
But if we have the European model with 27 countries, but a regulator in Brussels, you're saying it's too slow. Correct?
Well, obviously, if you have to the more layers
No,
you have to
correct.
deal with, yes.
Good. So would you be in favour of a Brussels regulator that has more power that they chose not to use a la United States, but a single regulator for the whole of the continent?
Well, yeah, ultimately you would get there, but first you have to have a fairly huge wave of consolidation before that makes sense, because you don't have any pan-European operators in our business.
No, but you can make rules in Brussels that have to be followed by all 27 members of the union. Would you prefer? Is that what never mind what you can do, is that your preference?
The preference is that you have a system that is replicated in a way so that it works easily. You can recognize
regulation.
it. And we do no. You can simplify it, but make it so that it is similar across the borders. And there are positive directions there on that. It just goes slowly.
Would then that create the consolidation? You make the regulations, and that would make you guys in the business consolidate along the lines of the Americans.
Here comes the next one. I was talking about the spectrum side of the business and these things, and then you come back to the competition side. You have small individual markets.
Would you prefer to get rid of these small individual markets, creating a larger market in the union, more similar to the AT&T Verizon model in the United States? From a consumer and a business point of view, which I know perhaps is a slight...
Different things. Which are different things, perhaps?
Correct. But would you prefer that?
Well, I think we go in that direction. If you look at the structure of the industry, they break up the value chains, you see that more and more of these things are produced with a much bigger scale than the individual state. And that's the only way to go.
I want to turn back to the euro. Arnie, you say it's basically got to be pulled apart, correct?
Unless a wonder is coming across and saving it all. So I'm basically saying yes.
But you're a professor of economics, and you know as well as I do, better than me, that if you pull the euro apart, there is going to be hell on wheels for those people involved.
That's exactly why I'm saying, can that be done technically? Is it a feasible way to go? And there's this new party in Germany that argues that the Germans should exit the euro, not the Club Med countries. And it was this article in Financial Times half a year ago in which it was said that you looked at the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was considered, it was unthinkable of the breakup. And then the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 in November, and then all of a sudden it became inevitable that the union should break up. And Russia exited in December 2 years later. So we tend to think in very narrow concepts, and sometimes the unthinkable becomes the inevitable, and that can happen to the euro too.
Absolutely possible, but completely and utterly disastrous.
That I don't know. I think you're telling me something that...
If Greece were to leave, I mean, during the course of the euro debate, the number of people, like yourself perhaps, who said time and again that that Greece should leave the euro. Greece should leave the euro. How many in here think Greece should leave the euro? Want to have a yes or a no? Let's keep that there. Would you say we've got, I think we've probably got more greens than, would you agree? Do we agree with more greens? Would you agree? No, maybe half and half almost.
I think it's. I don't agree with the yeses here. I think where we are now, what has been invested into the turnaround in Greece, and what has happened to the people there, I think the chances are that they can turn the corner.
How many think Cyprus should leave the euro? You, sir, in the white T-shirt, why do you think Cyprus should leave the euro? If they're small and weak, isn't that exactly the moment that they should stay in the euro?
No, then they could devalue their currency and export and make it important.
Fair point. Back to Cyprus. Who said Cyprus should leave the euro? It's amazing, isn't it, when they know they might be called upon. What a bunch of wimps. Why do you think they should leave the euro?
I think they had a rotten currency system.
Well, we know that.
Yeah, and but it's not possible when they're within euro because they get supported. They don't have to deal with the consequences the same way as when they're outside of the euro system.
Who thinks the UK, thank you, who thinks the UK should leave the European Union? Who thinks the UK? Come on, everybody's got to take part here. We're going to keep asking this question until every single person. You, sir, in the light blue T-shirt, I don't see your colour. Should the UK leave? You don't have to answer the question, but you have to at least show a thing. Who thinks the UK should leave? Oh, you think they should leave? Why? I lied.
Always works.
Right.
There's no way in between.
So, yes, sir, are you just playing with the thing, or is that a yes? Yes, you're in the middle. You're just sort of playing with the
I think not, the UK should stay in the eurozone.
no, it's not in the zone, it's in the European Union. Yeah.
Basically the same thing then, that they should stay because it's a financial union, and then when you leave it, you have a whole market suddenly disappearing.
As we look at this debate, the UK, the UK with its referendum in 2017, assuming Cameron wins the next election, is going to be the first big chance for everybody to start having a go at this, aren't they? Isn't it?
I think for you, this is the three Bs. Bad for Britain. I think it's bad for Brussels, and also bad for the global order somehow. It will be a weaker Europe. So I think.
No, come on. Not the result. You're talking about the actual.
Whether they will end up there having the referendum. I think, as you know, Cameron has said that he wants to renegotiate the terms of their membership. Either he can reform the EU. Nobody believes that he can do that in a short time.
But you know.
Or he could get some concessions, and then he invite his voters to have a vote. And if you had that vote today, probably it will end up as a no.
But you know as well as I do that many of the countries in the Union also want to have a renegotiation or at least a repatriation of some powers from Brussels.
Yeah, that's why it's a bit romantic and naive somehow of Cameron to say that, okay, he will manage to get these results of the negotiations because he will trigger just a slippery slope and very few will be ready to give him those conditions now because, as you say, it will just trigger an avalanche of other demands.
Anne.
So,
go on, yes. Well,
no, just I think that for the EU now there are two issues. One is to save the euro. The other is to protect what they call the integrity of the internal market, at least to maintain that aspect. And I think the UK exit or Brexit or whatever you call it relates to this idea of protecting the integrity of the internal market. That's opening another shop.
But I think you're back to the question of how many layers and tiers and speeds should there be in Europe? Should there be one European Union, or should there be 10 different ways to integrate?
Okay, so how many should there be? What's your preference?
I think the EU will be stronger if it is one European Union and one way to do it, and either you're in or you're out.
You're in or you're out? Even though you've got
I think that will, if the goal is to get a competitive European Union to compete as a big and attractive market, and also to build a place where it is easy to build competitive business, to start with small businesses and make them grow. I think that is easier to do if you have a European Union.
I don't think so. I think you're sort of mixing things up because the idea of an ever closer union, I think that is all gone. It's a matter of the optimal closeness of the union, and where we've just even deeper, even wider, that has been the slogans. Now the time is to consolidate, like in your business, to consolidate the European Union so it becomes, in a sense, optimal. And how does that union look like? And of course, it has been a phenomenal success. The peace in Europe since the Second World War is proof to that. And these other countries that become member have really gone through some sobering processes in order to qualify. So very much to be said for the
people always talk about this peace in Europe since the Second World War, and I can certainly see the sympathy of that argument as against a a major conflict. But it didn't stop the genocide in the Balkans, did it?
No, I guess not. But,
You know, I mean, if we're holding up peace in Europe as being the symbol of success,
But the starting point there was to have peace among member states, and then you kind of move that further on, and that
oh no! If you're the biggest, if you take the Monroe Doctrine from the US, if you're the big, in our sphere of in our hemisphere, in our sphere of influence, the EU in Europe is the sphere of influence.
There is no defense community in Europe. There was no possibility of interference at the time of the Balkan disruption. Delors would have been desperately keen to get in. He couldn't because there was no legal base on which to do so.
Exactly.
If we had a defense system, it would have been better, but we haven't got one.
So, arguing your point, it would have been preferable to have had a closer union so that you could have sent in European troops. Ooh, sorry about that.
And we lost it by the vote of the French Parliament.
So it's the French's fault.
as always.
It's always the French.
I think, hands up all who agree on that one. Yes, there we are, right. We're already eating on that one. Where were we? We were
Britain.
Sorry?
You were on Britain.
We're beating up on Britain or France. That's what I love about the European debate. You can gratuitously beat up on everybody in such a way. But back to where you were saying, though, about your argument.
Me?
Yes. About the closer integration, and we're at this point of an optimal zone or an optimal.
Because I think the euro and the European Union is not only a political or an economic issue, it's a cultural issue. It's a matter of culture. It is.
Why do you all keep wanting to...
No, let me finish. And so the culture is that the culture. You said that if you attack me, I should attack back. So
Am I offended?
Yes, yes. And then the euro is a matter of making the Greek and the Italians behave like the Germans. It's a culture issue. How do you live with 2% inflation? Now, how do you live with 2% inflation and balanced budget? And that is not in the realm or the experience of the Club Med countries, and that is what is presupposed. And you assume the problem away with the growth and stability pact, which is just a waste of paper. So it has been analyzed by economists, and economists are not up to it because it's much more than economics, which is at stake.
Right.
Just wondering,
That's a cultural aspect.
just as a factual thing, and I don't know the exact answer to this, but how much was the value of all of those defense contracts we pushed on those Greeks also? I mean, let's have a balanced picture here.
Or indeed all the olive oil we bought. On that cultural aspect, you see, this is the problem, isn't it? There are so many strands to this. It's a political, not an economic project. There's a cultural aspect. We have tied together an enormous number of countries that should not be tied together in an ever-tightening corset.
Let me just say one more. It's more matter of habits. What kind of habits do you have? And the habits in Greek is different from the habits in Germany.
But can they coexist in a union?
Not in a monetary union. Not in a monetary union, but in a
Can they
union.
coexist?
Yes, they can. If you have the right to devalue.
Hang on, you said no a second ago. Which is it?
I said no. As far as I said no related to a monetary union, but not EU as a union. European Union can survive happily.
Can they coexist? Can the Greeks in the south and the Club Med countries coexist with the Finns, the Swedes, the Germans?
Sure. I think so. Yeah, no, I don't see any.
In an economic and monetary and fiscal union.
That's another problem. Right? So I think
But that's what we've got!
No, you don't have a fiscal union. That's the problem.
Well, we're heading towards it.
No. No way.
The fiscal compact.
No. Forget it.
What do you mean forget it? It's just been passed. It's not broken yet.
But the Germans won't pay up to the extent that you assume.
Can we come back to your question, please? To your answer, please? Can they coexist?
Yeah, I think they can coexist, but I think that there are limits. I agree very much with what Arne said, in the sense that there's an optimal integration aspect, and you need to combine these different social, cultural, economic aspects, and also the political legitimacy to it. But I think we need to separate between having a European market, internal market, and the currency. obviously it's easier. More people would agree that it's easier to have a shared market than shared currency, right? Because it requires much more in terms of obligations, in terms of solidarity and commitment. And what we have seen during this crisis is that actually the crisis has reduced the level of solidarity and increased the distrust among citizens, and not only to EU institutions, but also to national institutions, to private banks, and to most actors that are of elites somehow.
Sir, you're nodding.
Well, I tend to always be on the optimistic side. I think that we are going through a huge experiment. We're going to try, like you said, in other words, to impose a kind of fiscal discipline that has worked predominantly in the northern parts of Europe, but into the south. And I think that the lessons we've learned, what we've been through now, will carry the day. At the end of the day, I think it will work out.
Right. Question. Yes, sir.
You said that the countries need, the EU needs more obligation from the countries. Isn't there a problem that the EU doesn't have any real sanction possibilities?
They had sanctions, but they didn't use them.
If they use it, is it a real possibility?
Well, they do now under the Fiscal Compact or the Fiscal Treaty. There are sanctions on both under the.
There were sanctions before too.
Sorry? Well, there were before, but now the excessive deficit procedure. But you're right. Will they use it? Is the question.
And how do you use them when France and Britain, and France and Germany also break the rules?
Yeah, which, of course, France is just now getting another 2 years to meet its deficit targets. Good point. Next question. Next question. I'm told that there were some bright people in here. They may be on this side of the room, but perhaps. All right, question for the audience. Oh, yes, sir. Go ahead.
What does a sanction help with? I mean, there is a country with a huge debt, and then you put a sanction on it, and this is helping?
No, the sanction is designed if you don't start putting things right.
So a sanction will help. So when things are good, you didn't change stuff because it was hard, and maybe there are some constraints, then you put a sanction on top of it, and now there are even less resources, and the government is still more constrained and so on, and it's probably a big crisis for the government in charge, and then it will make the changes. The beating will continue until the moral improves. That's the idea.
Well, I think that's a good way of putting it. But I think the idea is that you make the reforms and then the sanctions come into play if you don't make the reforms. Do you agree, sir?
Yes.
Good. Who thinks, get your cards, let's see, make sure everyone's got a card in their hand. A card in your hand. It's not difficult. Who thinks that a Greece and a Club Med countries can coexist in a union with the northern countries? Sorry?
A union or a monetary union?
Both.
A good question. Sorry? What would you like to know for their views on?
I'd like to know whether you think they can coexist in a monetary one.
Okay, let's start with a monetary union. Can the South coexist with the North in a monetary union? Yes or no? You think they can? Yes. Why?
Because I think that we can do whatever they want as long as they put their minds into that. And I think it would be a disaster. If I'm from the South, it would be a disaster.
Where are you from?
Portugal.
Right.
It would be a disaster if we were to fail.
So from your point of view, and I'm very conscious now that your country is suffering extremely badly, high unemployment. The Parliament's just, as the courts just voted down the last deficit reduction package. But you think it is possible to, you think you'd be better off continuing within, not without?
Yes.
So the next question becomes, yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the problem lies as well in the governance. The southern countries are not known for governing very well. And I think it's not just the fault of the European Union, but it's...
And the North does so much better.
Sorry?
And the rest of us do a lot better.
I think so. I think there is... I think not enough responsibility is given to the national government. Because
Would you agree? Sorry, one second. Would you agree that the South doesn't govern very well?
Yes.
Oh, good. There you are. Your point is made. Thank you. Carry on. She agreed. So you're the author of your own misfortune.
I think so, but I think we have a problem.
So you want everybody else to bail you out of the mess that you've got yourself into? Yes.
Oh, she wants to acquire new habits. She wants Portuguese to acquire new habits.
But you believe that they can't do that.
I'm not saying they can't, but I'm skeptical, and they have to, otherwise it
What's the
won't.
difference between I'm sceptical and they can't?
Oh, it's a big difference.
You don't believe they will.
Why do you consider my belief? I couldn't care less what I believe.
Because you won't come off the fence. All right.
But on the I'm going to try to be a little bit positive now.
Like me.
Yeah. No, but I think if you look at history, I'm talking history, a very long span of history.
Oh, please no.
Just for 1 second. But the thing is that I think innovations are always greatly overrated, and everyone is always over-optimistic in the short run. But in the long run, people are always too little optimistic. So everyone was extremely over-optimistic, of course, when the euro was established. But maybe in the long run, we're being too pessimistic. Maybe it can.
Too pessimistic.
Yeah, maybe it can muddle through somehow.
You see, this is the argument that sends me ballistic. This is the bit where steam comes out my ears. You're saying the best we can do with 12.1% unemployment, 4 or 5 countries being bailed out, another 2 or 3 on the way, the best we can do is muddle through.
I'm not saying it's the best we can do. I'm saying we can't rule out that it is possible. That's something else. We can't rule out that it's possible, but I'm not saying it's necessarily the best thing to do.
But isn't that just being honest? I mean, when you are in the middle of this kind of crisis, it's not like you have one leader or one system that points a crystal clear direction to going forward, and that is pretty close to my definition of muddling through, while you are kind of, in a way, hoping to get some growth back.
Right. So I come to my next, I have noticed, I come to my point. Would you prefer, for the smoother, better organisation and running of the union, for things to be more centralised and a clearer leader and a clear guidance, whether that be Brussels, the Parliament, the Commission, the Council, at least have somebody driving the bus, even if that comes at the cost of national sovereignty?
I think you addressed it before we came in here. You talked about the need for clarity. You say that when you listen to different leaders that you named, you don't feel that, for example, unemployment is mentioned in a speech that lasts for 20 minutes. You say it's an issue, whereas other places where you have more clearly defined leadership comes to the fore in the second sentence.
Sir, no.
Well, it has something that maybe it's a little bit related to what you're saying in terms of unemployment. I would like to kind of ask the experts here, what they think that monetary union is possible with economies that are so different, given the fact that you have a set monetary policy that doesn't play so well for all countries, that is primarily focused on price stability instead of fostering employment. So is that possible, a monetary policy that actually fits so well Germany and it doesn't fit so well all the time in Greece?
Which really goes to the core of the whole issue, doesn't it? Is it possible? Start with you. Start with you. Is it possible to get the? I mean, we are at a turning point. We all agree. We all agree, correct? Well, we agree because I say we agree. We are at this turning point, and the core question becomes: are we trying to fix something that can be fixed? Or do we need to think again fresh? Start with you, sir.
It's always very difficult to build a boat while you're at sea. In a rough sea in particular, it's very difficult to build a boat. And that's the kind of exercise what we are doing now. It's probably possible to build all kinds of rafters out there, good and bad looking boats. But I just let me return to one point that you brought up, and that's that are we kind of muddling through without any direction or any leadership. I think what we are... This fall there will be an election in Germany, right? And I think that 1 year ago, when everybody was concerned about the collapse of the euro, then the financial markets and the US and others gonna really put the knife on the throat of the euro, of the EU, and they made some decisions. Now this kind of market pressure is not anymore on, and that's why there's no reform agenda. There's these proposals out there on a genuine economic, monetary, and fiscal union and political union, And this is the agenda that's lying there, and it's kind of gradually maturing, I think. And so I think there will be some kind of leadership stepping up to it, but as of now, there is not sufficient pressure for kind of putting the knife on the throat to make those steps.
Yeah, you came up with the modeling through exercise once again, and you wanted sort of a strong centralized system, and then the issue becomes, who are to decide that? I mean, we have not discussed democratic deficit, which is a core element in the setup of the euro, and the more you integrate, the more becomes deficient the lack of democracy all the way. So yes, you might very well have a more strongly and centralized system, but how to decide on that is instrumental to the extent that it gets legitimacy. So you cannot.
But you'd agree but would you say that there is a democratic deficit?
Oh yes, huge democratic deficit. The whole monetary union is an exercise in the lack of democracy.
Would you agree?
Well, I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think
It was an easy question.
when a lot of people feel that there is a democratic deficiency, then you have to say that that's the case.
Anne?
There is, yes, I agree. Yeah, that's a short answer.
Certainly, I'm a bit more uncertain on that. I think that there are certainly some democratic weaknesses, but I think almost all the decisions that are made so far in this, handling the euro crisis is done within the treaties, and this is clearly delegated competences by the member states, etc. So I don't see it as, it's not a democratic deficit as such, but I think the main issue is whether can you move forward in saving the euro within the existing treaty format. I think no. And that's the issue, and the problem.
You think no?
I think no. Yes.
You think
so? You need treaty reform to make that.
And you just pulled the pin out of the hand grenade.
No. Yeah.
Come on, just.
And that's the problem, because everybody knows that you will not get the sufficient unanimity or agreement among the member states, and you cannot kind of pass it in a referendum. So this is the pitfall.
We need treaty reform. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. In order to...
Professor, do we need treaty reform?
Sorry?
Richard, there's a very patient lady in green who's asked for the word for a long, long time.
So please.
Where?
Here.
Well, let me just find out from the panel. I didn't catch you. Forgive me. I didn't catch you. And you're not... Don't think you can use the lady in green to avoid the question. I know your sort. I know your sort. I'm only coming back up here to make sure they're still awake. Students, you still awake?
Yes.
You having fun?
Absolutely.
Good. Welcome on board. An aisle or a window. You, Professor, do we need treaty reform? And if we do, will we get it?
Yes.
Yes to which?
I don't know. You want a short answer? Yes.
No. So we think we need treaty reform?
Yes, I think we do need a treaty. Yes, I think so. But it's incredibly hard to get because we have 27 countries to agree on it. So it's a tall order.
Which, of course, the moment we start to pull the thing apart, and the moment we pull the thing apart allows the British to come in and have their renegotiation, and then the whole thing comes down round our ears, which is exactly, Anne, what they're trying to avoid. Correct?
No.
Sorry? What do you mean? Are you the fifth member?
It's not going to happen.
What's not going to happen?
You're not going to have a renegotiation. You may have a new treaty to deal with the issue of the weaknesses in the current system governing the euro.
Oh, so you're going with the German method, which is a limited...
My method is a Welsh method.
You're going with the German solution, which is a limited treaty, not quite a renegotiation, but a limited treaty thingamajig.
Not specifically related to the problems of the euro.
The moment you start doing that, you will have opened the Pandora's box. The lady in green.
And the less well-off ones being helped. But so perhaps there's the problem of lacking of taking responsibility. Is there a way that countries could be held more accountable?
That's a matter of solidarity. I mean, you cannot force the Norwegians or the Germans or the Swedes to be solidaric with the Greek and pay their bills. That would be fine with me. We have enough money. But the matter is, how do you engineer that? And you can think about it, and you can be very much in favor of it. But it's a democratic issue.
Right, but the point is...
I think that the national governments are also, to some extent, using this democratic deficit as an excuse when they need something done. So they sort of blame the EU for we have to do this, it comes from the EU, and it's, so that's sort of building up under some of the hostility to the EU.
Following the lady in green's view, she's basically talking about a transference of wealth from the north to the south, which is what is already underway, isn't it? I mean, through the bailout system. But if taken to its logical conclusion, some form of mechanism that allows for a permanent transference of wealth from the richer to the poorer is the way to make the whole thing work.
Yeah, but I think that this kind of redistribution of risks and redistribution of wealth and goods, etc., it requires some element of solidarity, and it requires some guarantee to prevent kind of moral hazards and some kind of also shared identity in some sense, a community feeling. And that's the issue. That's why it's and those things they are anchored in deep social processes, and we are not there now.
No, but I mean, okay, sorry.
Would you be in favour of a common language? Yes. Which would be?
That's a good question.
Esperanto.
So you think, okay, I think we're on to a winner here. Right, how many people think that the common language should be German? No, Kim Alkman.
That's going to be
Right, yeah, that is good. Parlez-vous français? How many think it should be French?
Mais naturellement.
How many think it should be English? What do you think it should be? Don't say Welsh.
One common language will never work.
That was
But the German president in his recent speech said he was in favour of the working language of Europe being English.
But it is already.
Yes, I'm not sure we want to take too many examples from the former Soviet Union. I think that might be a rather dangerous road to go down. Or maybe not. Well, yes, but a lot of people did die, and quite a few people never went to vast parts of Siberia, never to be seen again. Are you suggesting we do the same thing with northern Finland?
Talking about the language and the cultures, a lot of cultures were together, and it wasn't that much problem, even though their spending and financial culture was totally different for all the countries, but it worked. That's one of the reasons, because there was some leader, and because...
Which one? No, I'm curious to know. I mean, are you more to the Stalin, or are you more to the Gorbachev? Right, I think we know what you've done. Thank you. Yes, sir. You're the back. Quick question. We're coming to an end. So who do we need? More Merkels.
Different habits.
Sorry?
Different habits.
Right. Are any Italians offended? Yes, sir.
Yeah, maybe you could help me understand something, but as far as
I think that's probably difficult, but go on.
as far as I see it, the transfer of wealth isn't really happening to the poor people. That's why we have a lot of riots in the streets, because it seems to be going to larger financial institutions to be able to finance this. So I'm really sure if this is transfer of wealth to people who need it. That's my question.
Good point, isn't it? The transference is actually sort of, we've happily bailed out the banks and the greedy bankers' bonuses, but the poor have been left behind. Would you agree?
To some extent, I agree. Yes, I think, and this is part of the crisis. I think there are lots of things that have been solved in a wrong fashion, so that some of the most suffering ones are worse off. Well, some people who actually made some of the difficulties at first hand, they are benefiting from it.
Last one. Yes, sir. Do we have any?
Do we have them?
Yes, go ahead.
I think we have a problem with democracy, which is we're not fully represented. I have my own voice, but I can give my full opinion about the European Union.
Why not?
Because, I don't know, we can utilize, for example, internet, the platform.
Well, what do you think of the European Union? What do you think of the European Union?
I think it's great. I think it should be more integrated. And if each one of us could vote on the internet, different laws,
Good idea.
through different periods of time, then at least it will be more democracy because then each person would have our own voice. And instead of being represented by certain people.
So you're for the ultimate form of democracy where we vote on most matters. A final question to each member of the panel, and it goes like this. One thing that you hope the leaders do in the next 12 months. You don't have to have any realistic view that they will do it. Start with you, sir. One thing that you hope that they will do in the next 12 months.
I hope they will be naive enough to think that if they only focus on growth going forward, that they will have a chance of re-elected. They may not be right in that, but the only thing to do is to focus on growth and then to leave some of the, eat some camels and take some beating, but just go for it.
Go for growth. Enough austerity.
Yes, I think you know you talk about austerity as if there was an alternative. You have to.
You can't have it both ways.
Wait. When you go, yes, you can, because it's about how you spend your money. It's not always about how much money you spend, but how you spend it.
One thing you hope.
Fight unemployment.
One thing you hope that they do in the next 12 months.
I hope they look at the gross domestic product in the United States and the gross domestic product in Europe. Maybe this way.
Yes, that.
And that, yeah, maybe more like this.
Yeah.
And I hope they look at those figures and that they realize that this is a time to do something and not just talk.
That's your view.
I hope that the big bank go broke and that...
they what?
Go broke. That
Go broke?
Yes, a big bank goes broke, and that the people who have lent the money lose their shirt.
Final question to you, members of our friend. Go on, that's it. So you've heard the debate. All those in favour of a closer integration of member countries, show me the yes. That's a yes and a no. So most of you, all those in favour of a loose collection, who's in favour of a loose collection? Show me yes or no. Quite clearly the yeses have it. We're going for a looser integration. Our panel, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.